Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder, and we have something a little bit different for the channel today. One of my favorite content creators, Corey Loses, who, by the way, is also mod lead for the Empire at War mod Thrawn's Revenge, has started his own Star Wars Legends YouTube channel, and trust me when I say it guys, Corey knows his Star Wars Expanded Universe content extraordinarily well. You'll know that if you've played the Thrawn's Revenge mod. Like this channel, I know he'll be doing deep dives into Star Wars Legends. It's not going to simply be recovering topics that other YouTubers have already made videos on, and we can see that with the video I'm about to show you guys, which is by Corey and is also available on his channel, which I'll link below. In the future, I believe he's got content planned on Corellian insurgencies, and I believe he also has a dedicated video on Garm Bel Iblis coming up. It would mean a lot if you guys would support my friend, and I'll put a link to his channel down in the description. But now, he's going to explain how the HUTTs helped to shape galactic history.
HUTTs are not exactly the first group to come to mind when you think of the galactic military powers in Star Wars. Instead, they tend to conjure the image of manipulators of the criminal underworld, but that hasn't always been the case. Today's video will bring us into the region of the galaxy between the mid and outer rims known as HUTT space, where we'll be taking a look at the HUTT government system and how it has evolved over time within the Star Wars Legends universe. Today we'll be taking a look at what drove the HUTTs from the ancient HUTT Empire mentioned by Darth Mar in the Old Republic, to the HUTT-KAJIDIC system and cartel, which people may be more familiar with. Early on in galactic history, over 25,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the HUTTs were a warlike species, aiming to fight and conquer or enslave any who opposed them, or individually going off to fight their own battles in the galaxy, somewhat like the more modern Shell HUTTs. Their conquest caused the effective extinction of several other species who are either too weak to become servants, or too strong to submit to servitude. You may recognize several of the species who did survive the HUTT conquest and became common servants of the HUTTs within Star Wars. The Nikto are one such example. The Nikto species had been under the domination of the cult of Ventueshu for the better part of a century when a HUTT named Chiraba visited their world and unseated the cult, binding the Nikto into servitude alongside the Klatooinians and Vodrins with the Treaty of VONTOR, an agreement which would last over 25,000 years. It was not until the year 44 ABY, or after the Battle of Yavin, with the desecration of the Fountain of the Ancients by the Lost Tribe of the Sith, that the treaty was rendered void according to the Klatooinians, an event which took place in the Fate of the Jedi novel series. The Fountain of the Ancients was a Klatooinian holy site which the HUTTs were supposed to be the protectors of. Many Klatooinians even called the Fountain of Ancients the Fountain of the HUTT Ancients, believing their HUTT overlords to be their deities. Possibly the most well-explored war the HUTTs were involved in within Legends, and the war which likely established the HUTT Empire as a galactic power, took place around the time of the Nikto subjugation. This war occurred between 25,102 years before the Battle of Yavin and 25,096 years before the Battle of Yavin, which was around half a century before the Republic had even formed. In this war, the HUTTs were targeted by Zim's Empire, a coalition of forces from the Tion cluster hoping to take rich HUTT worlds, particularly Kovari and Slahero, resulting in heavy fighting within the recently claimed Cycladic cluster, an area which included Klatooine. While the HUTTs were not organized into a single fighting force before this point, the intervention of a HUTT named Cossack Inizhik Arderv galvanized the HUTTs around himself as clan general against the Tianese, with the assistance of the Niktos, Klatooinians, and Vodrins, some of the main HUTT servant species. Another HUTT under Cossack's command, Bunta the HUTT, commanded the HUTT forces in some of the most important battles of the war, including those at Kovari, which, while a defeat for the HUTTs, resulted in heavy Tianese losses against hordes of HUTT slaves. Most importantly, Bunta the HUTT was the commander at the three battles of VONTOR. While the first two battles of VONTOR were indecisive, the third battle was where Bunta the HUTT was finally able to decisively crush the Tianese invasion force of battle droids and prevent what could have been Tianese domination of the galaxy at large had Zim been allowed to continue. Around 1,000 years later, the HUTTs would again be prodded by the fledgling Republic into attacking the Tianese in the war against what had then become called the Honorable Union of Desevero and Tion. This war had been raging between the Republic and the Tianese forces for nearly 100 years already by the time the HUTTs joined, between 24,000 and 23,900 years before the Battle of Yavin, with the Republic, who at the start of the war essentially lacked a fleet, unable to hold up against the Tianese assault down the Prelemian trade route. After the Republic successfully convinced the HUTTs to start assaulting Tianese borders, the tide began to turn in the Republic's favor. After that, it was only a matter of time before the Tianese became unable to hold up against the HUTT and Republic forces, and effectively this ended the HUTT's old rivals' ability to sustain themselves as a galactic power at all. While the period between 24,000 and 15,000 years before the Battle of Yavin is not otherwise explored in much depth, the Hutts appear to have continued on in their warlike ways for that period of 9,000 years. Although the Hutts didn't seem to be truly united in a clear way before KAJIDIC's intervention for the war against XIM, this 9,000-year period would be when the Hutt Empire was at its prime. At some point during this period, however, the Hutt Empire began to collapse into infighting. Most people would generally be familiar with Nal Hutta as the seat of Hutt power as well. However, in this early phase of Hutt history, the Hutt territory was ruled from the original Hutt homeworld of Varl. The transition from Varl to Nal Hutta, originally known as Ivokar, came at the same time as this infighting, which also led to the reformation of the Hutt Empire and the introduction of the KAJIDIC system. This infighting eventually took the form of a series of disastrous Hutt civil wars known as the Hutt Cataclysms, shaking Hutt civilization to its core. During this fighting, Varl was one of many Hutt worlds which became completely unlivable, forcing Hutts to move to Ivokar, now Nal Hutta, and under the leadership of Butila Hestla Gamura, established the Hutt Council of Elders, also known as the Ruling Council, to prevent this kind of devastation from once again destabilizing Hutt civilization. This ruling council established the HUTT-KAJIDIC system, which would be maintained consistently until the end of the Yuzan Vong War in 29 ABY, though most principles of the new organizational structure of Hutt society would go on even beyond that. The basic premise of the system was that Hutts would eschew their previous focus on open warfare, and instead would attempt to gain influence in the galaxy through economic and political machinations, as opposed to through military brute force. The members of the ruling council were the heads of important families, like the Silishik and Bisadi clans, who essentially became the bosses of Hutt crime families as Galactic History went on. This group of leading Hutts included the infamous Jabba the Hutt, a member of the Silishik clan. While this may seem like a change in focus for the Hutts, it's not necessarily as huge of a paradigm shift as it may seem on paper. Economic coercion still fits within the realm of ruling through hard power, although it may not be quite as overt as other forms of hard power like military strength. They simply believed this change to be the most expedient way to avoid the devastation they'd experienced in the cataclysms. Aside from, and even sometimes supported by, the development of their economic control, the Hutts still did retain the means to rearm should they see the need, which did occur or is at least considered through some points of galactic history. One of the earlier known moments where this became a possibility was during the conquest of Mekeb, covered in the Rise of the Hutt Cartel expansion for the Old Republic MMO, about 3,640 years before the Battle of Yavin, during the Galactic War between the Sith and the Republic. A crime overlord, Taboro the Hutt, had taken control of the Hutt Cartel and aimed to remilitarize the Hutts, bringing them back to their former status as a galactic powerhouse once again to challenge the Sith and Republic. While the idea of a Hutt force challenging the Sith or Republic may seem far-fetched, Darth Marr's response and attitude in the game supports this as being entirely possible should the Hutts decide to do it, especially taking into account the infighting between the Sith at that time. Taboro aimed to conquer the planet of Mekeb to get access to Isotope 5, which he planned to use as a power source to fuel the Hutt war machine. Before being able to accomplish any of his goals and restore the Hutt's military capacity, other Hutt leaders shunned Taboro and instead entered negotiations with the Republic, which led to the cartel returning to their normal operations and abandoning Taboro's designs. Although they still did not hold a formal military, there was still some level of military capacity the Hutts were capable of. Sources like Star Wars Galaxies include several starfighters or small ships designed by or for the Hutts, like the Skik Fighter or the Caustic Frigate from the Lords of Nal Hutta Edge of the Empire sourcebook during the Imperial era, as well as the Azalis and Azure warships shown or mentioned in the Old Republic. So the Hutts clearly still had some capability to defend themselves or engage in warfare if they really needed to. This remained the state of affairs for Hutts until the Yuzan Vong War. Under the Empire, the Hutts as a non-military power were generally left to their own devices, nominally under Imperial rule, but Hutt credits would continue to flow through the galactic underbelly, and the Imperials had no delusions of being able to easily cut out Hutt influence. When the Yuzan Vong finally attacked decades later, in 26 ABY until 29 ABY, Hutt territory was one of the places hit hardest by the extragalactic invaders, devastating their worlds on a scale worse than even that experienced in the Cataclysms. In the years following the Vong defeat, the galaxy once again began to hear rumors of Hutt warships emerging, something unheard of for thousands of years at that point. Their defeat at the hands of the Vong had changed the Hutt philosophy, showing them that economic power alone could only keep them safe from so much. The Vong were not an enemy that could be bought off, and there were no guarantees that the next threat could be either. So the KAJIDIC system in its original form quickly fell by the wayside, and the Hutts returned to arming themselves. During the Second Galactic Civil War, the Hutts even joined the Confederacy in their assault on the Galactic Alliance, using fleets of Hutt Batils, Taradas, and Chalandians in important battles like the Battle of Balmora and the Battle of Kuat. These ships and their exact capabilities remained mysterious even to their Confederate allies, as the ship would often self-destruct rather than leave anything for anyone to study. This change after the Vong War marked a new period of HUTT activism in the galaxy. Despite the shift in military philosophy, the HUTTs continued to be led by the HUTT ruling council implemented after the Cataclysm, with figures such as Jewel the Hutt serving on that body as late as the Second Imperial Civil War, the Legacy era, around 130 ABY, so some elements of the KAJIDIC system definitely did survive the Vong War, although clearly not all of them did. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the HUTTs as our first video on Corey's Datapad. I would also like to thank EckhartsLadder for his encouragement and support in setting up this channel. If you have other suggestions for topics you'd like me to cover on this channel, please leave them in the comments below. I plan to release 2 videos a week on this channel on Wednesdays and Saturdays, so make sure you subscribe if you'd like to see that content. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.